We want to continue the message, The Death of a Promise. This is part 2 of the sermon series. We're going to be preaching 2 parts of this, and then we're going to go to the window of faith. That'll be our next message, and the evidence of faith. As we said before, these are 3 messages that are closely related to my heart, and they mean a whole lot to me. There are certain messages that preachers have, and they love preaching. They preach them out a lot, and I do this ever so often, and to encourage the church and all that. If you ever notice, there are preachers that will have a specific Bible that they love preaching out. For example, when I was called into the ministry, my uncle had a Scofield Bible, and he loved that Scofield Bible, and he read off that Scofield Bible, and that's what he had. So therefore, and as I was called to preach, I turned around and used the Scofield Bible for a while. But when I got married, my wife at the time, she had this chain reference Bible, and I sat down and I started using it, and that called to me, and that has been my Bible ever since. All the messages you'll ever hear me preach is come straight out from the chain reference Bible. I love that Bible. The bookstore over here in Maryville closed down a while ago, and I'd go in there. This has been many years ago, and I'd be able to purchase that. But a number of years back, about 10, 15 years ago, they stopped carrying the chain reference Bible, and went to all these new modern day versions of Bibles, stuff like that. So last year, I went down to Kentucky to see my mother and her husband, Ron, and we went to Tennessee, a place in Tennessee where they had a Bible bookstore. And I walked in there, and lo and behold, they had the chain reference Bible that I've been looking for so long. And I picked one of them up. And Ron, while I was there, was looking at a Rainbow Bible. And I haven't had a Rainbow Bible for quite some time. I bought one, and I gave it to my cousin, Donna Sue, for her to use. And I saved the computer program to the Rainbow Bible. And I gave the computer programmer to my brother Alan. And he has not since returned it, and that's been quite some time ago. But I bought one of those too, and I have those too. And they are the Bible is a very precious book to me, and these two are very precious to me. The Rainbow Bible and the Chain Reference Bible that we preach out of every time that we have a message. But when we left off here in the Death of a Promise, we gave you a few clues of these people that God gave a great promise to, and he sentenced to death, and you've seen how in their lives how they came up. Now we're going to go on here, and there's one other one we're going to talk about is Habakkuk here in a few minutes. But if you have your Bibles, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 9. And it says here, "But we have the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, which raised the dead." Now notice it. We have the sentence of death in ourselves. Now God gives us a promise. He puts a sentence to death upon it, and we have it in ourselves, that we should not trust ourselves. But if we're not trusting ourselves, who do you trust? We trust God. And he's trying to, now some of us can trust God easier than others. Some of us, it's a big chore to trust God because we're not capable, because we want to do things. Just like Abraham, we said if he tried to fulfill the promise earlier, and he couldn't do it. I mean, it wasn't he wanted to do it his way and his time, but it wasn't his to fulfill. It was God's to fulfill, that God get the glory here. That is why God sentenced the promise to death, that we may not trust in our human resources, within ourselves. We will not trust in man's ways. We will not trust in any human flesh, but we are to cast completely in trusting in the Lord. All right, I'm going to throw a word in there. All this comes up to one word: patience. Now, when we are born again, patience is said in Galatians chapter 5 when it talks about the fruits of the Spirit. Have you ever noticed that especially as we grow older, that patience is the hardest lesson that we have to learn? We live, especially in this generation right now, where we have everything and it's fast food and fast income and fast things, and we go out there and we can just pick things up, whether it be shoes, clothes, or whatever, and it's already provided for us. We don't have to sit and wait and fix it or make it on our own anymore. How much patience do we have in waiting for God? We have a world here, we have to hurry up and wait. For those of you who have go see doctors, stuff like that, you have to hurry up, keep your appointments, and when you get there, you have to wait on the doctor to see you. The doctor ain't just don't come in, just get you right then and there and examine you, and you're on your way. No, it's a simple process of you having to wait on the doctor. And then in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 5, it said, "Now she that is a widow, indeed, and desolate, trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayer night and day." The word desolate means devastated, lonely, feeling rejected, and desired as hopeless. Have you ever had a hopeless situation? Been in a hopeless place in your life? Now, I want you to examine yourself in this. In hell, there is no hope. It's despair. It's devastation. There is no hope. Everybody in hell right now is hopeless right now. They're never going to get out. They're never going to have their lives back. It's over for them right now. Death equals trusting in God. I want you to understand that. This is the formula. Death equals trusting in God. No man can learn how to swim as long as he's touching the bottom, right? When you heard the story saying when you learned how to swim, your parents threw yourself out in the deep end, so either you swim or you die. One of the two. When my mother was real young and she didn't know how to swim, her mother had passed on. Her dad was working a lot, and her sisters took her out, and they had to do her the same way. They had to take her out to the deep end and just watch out for her, and she'll just float or sink or whatever, learn how to swim. It is the same thing as the birds. When the birds come of age, when the young little birds out of their nest and they hatch and all that, and they get to a certain point, the mother knows, and she starts throwing them out of the nest and learning them how to fly. And they teach them how to fly that way. So in faith here, and what we're talking about, is exactly the same way. You're never going to learn how to do this unless you go out in the deep end of it. Nobody wants to be at the deep end. Everybody wants to be where it's safe. It's just human nature to be where you're safe. Now let's talk about a prophet in the Bible named Habakkuk. Okay? Habakkuk had this vision of a revival coming. Okay? And he was stunned. The Lord had given this man a revelation of revival. In the last chapter, he was stunned in fear because of what he was seeing. Number one, in the vision, he sees God is taking away everything. He's stripping him of everything. How many of you ever had an onion and you had to strip away the layers? And you strip it away and you strip it away. And when you think it's enough, you strip more. It's the same way as us when you look at it like that. When you think that God can't strip anything else away, He does. How many of you ever been to that point? I have been in that point for at least 2 or 3 years now. You're talking to a man that has lost his job, lost a church, lost home. I lost my home. I've lost everything right now. And I've been stripped away from friends, family, and everything. Some things were easy to go through with. Some things were not that easy to handle and go through with at all right now. And see, people don't understand, they have this human concept. It's like when we started out preaching 4 months ago, we're trying to get you to see the spiritual aspect of things, not the physical, not the carnal minded, not the human nature of things. This has got nothing to do with the human nature of our lives. This has got everything to do with God and how He sees things. How do you think God sees things? He doesn't see things as we do. He sees it on a spiritual level, not a carnal-minded, fleshly, humanistic level. He sees things in future events. We see things not so much. There is pestilence and afflictions, and the mountains are trembling. Here it is, a revival is supposed to come, and now we got pestilence, we got afflictions, we got the mountains trembling, we got all these other things happening and not supposed to be happening. The sun and the moon are standing still. The seasons are being changed. The trampling of all the nations are happening. Devouring of the poor is happening. In Habakkuk's time, he sees this vision of a revival coming, and there's no signs of a revival. Everything is going completely opposite of this. And in the middle, he cries out, when I hear my belly tremble and my lips quiver at the voice, rottenness entered into my bones. I trembled in myself that I must rest in the day of trouble, when He comes up unto the people. He will invade them with His troops. Here is death on the promise. Absolute death. Everything opposite of what he had heard and believed. He is preaching revival. Instead, pestilence and afflictions occur. But suddenly he stands in faith because God is showing him something. The prophet stands up in the midst of all this and says, I am going to look, and what I see with my eyes, and I know what God said. Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 17 through 19 says this, although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall the fruit in the vine, in labor of the olive, and shall fail, and the fields shall not yield meat. The flock shall not cut off from their fold, and they shall not be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and I will make my feet like hinds' feet, and will make me to walk upward upon mine high places. To the chief singer in my stripped instrument. In other words, what is he doing? He could had said, praise God. I have heard the word of the Lord. I don't care what it says. I don't care how dark it is. Revival is coming. He said, I don't care what's around me. I don't care what I hear, what I see with my eyes. I know what God said. God said revival is coming, so therefore revival is coming. I don't care what happens. Revival is definitely coming. Why does God give a special promise then and puts a sentence to death upon it? We've given a special promise, expect it to come to pass, and then it is delayed until we finally say, Lord, did I hear you? Did you cause me to hope upon this? The reason he gives us this promise is he wants it to give us an anchor or a cable to hold on to the ship when the storm comes. He knows that you're going to go into a storm. Everybody that loves Jesus and is held to heaven, is headed to heaven, is going to be tested. You will go through a storm in your life. And some of us will go through a lot of storms, tremendous storms. And they're not just one storm. They're storm after storm after storm, whether it be in your family, your job, yourself, whatever. It's going to happen. And God knows this, so he gives you this special promise so you can hold on to it and grasp it, because he knows this is going to happen, and you're going to have an anchor, or he's going to have a cable, or you have to have something to hold on to while you're going through this. And you're not being blown every which way. God gives us a promise that he intends to be the anchor of hope and to hold us through every single storm we're going to go through. It is a promise to anchor your faith. This is the promise to anchor your faith through the toughest times, through the darkest valleys, to the loneliest times of your life. A, did you receive a promise from God again? B, personal or desired? And does it look dead? Are these getting worse than better? Are things getting worse in your life instead of better? God is in the process of fulfilling the promise, but before he fulfills it, he must first sentence it to death. How do you know that God is going to resurrect and raise your promise and bring it come to pass? There are ways that you can be absolutely sure, positive, that the promises that you have heard will come to pass. The promise is not really dead. It is sleeping. Again, like we said, do you remember when Jesus turned around and he told the disciples that he's got raise Lazarus from the dead. He's sleeping. While he's sleeping, he's going to wake up. No, you don't understand. He's dead. I've got to go and I've got to wake him up. I got to do that. See, the promise to us, it seems like it's dead, but it's not dead. It's only sleeping. Only God can awaken in it. You could be persecuted, that the promise is going to be fulfilled, but by these frequent visitations of the promise of your soul. Well, what does that mean? When God gets ready to fulfill the promise, He starts getting you crumbs. They might be little ones here, there, whatever, but as it keeps going on, it gets you get more and more and more of it. God keeps sending it back, reminding you, until finally it is there. You live with it. The promises become a settled issue. I know it because God keeps sending His Holy Ghost back into my heart, knocking at my heart's door about reminding me of the promise He speaks. It is over and over. Moses, his last message to Israel, the Hebrews, the good will of him that dwelleth into the bush, he with you bless you. Deuteronomy 33:16. Well, what does he mean by the bush? It all started with the bush. I've always preached this to my congregation. They have gotten up in age and all that, and I've kept telling them, just wait, God's still going to use you for something. He used Moses. Man is entitled to have 120 years upon this earth. That's what God said, 120 years. Moses fulfilled that. He lived the first 40 years of his life as the prince of Egypt. And he's going to be the next Pharaoh and all that. It seemed and looked like it, the way the cards were being played. But then fate came in, and he realized who he really was. He wasn't an Egyptian at all. He was a Hebrew posing as an Egyptian all this time. His life was a lie. How would you like to wake up today or tomorrow and find out no matter what you have done in your life was all for nothing? It is all a lie. Here he is, he's feeling this. And then he turns around and he does the unspeakable act one night. He sees this guard beating a Hebrew to death. I mean, he's just pulling him down and beating him senseless and all that. And Moses, don't know if you know this about him or not, but Moses had an anger problem. He had a very serious anger problem. And his anger got the better of him, and he couldn't take it anymore. And he did the unthinkable act back then. He killed the Egyptian guard. And in the law back then, when you did that, you were either killed or exiled. So all of his life right now comes to a complete stop. He turns around and he leaves, and he's exiled. And then he turns around, and for 40 years, we find him on the other side of the desert. He makes it the way they thought he was being killed, but he makes it way over there. And he's taking care of his father-in-law's sheep and stuff. And he's married, and he's settled down now. 40 years have gone by. Another 40. Now he's 80 now. 40 years come by. He's 80 years old. And he comes up and he sees this thing. And it beholds him. And he's never seen this thing before. And it really gets his attention. And here today we have these computer generators. And we have these holographic images and stuff like that. And we pride ourselves on that. And the people, I always say this about this. The burning bush, all the burning bush was the first holographic image that God put it. Here, Moses is looking at this bush on fire. and it's not being consumed. It is not being burned up. It's a holographic image. Technically, is what it is. What I look at it and picture it to be. And Moses has no idea about this. And the bird, it just won't burn up. He's just seeing it burn, burn, burn. But it doesn't stop. It doesn't go out or nothing. And it catches his attention, and he walks up to that burning bush, and he gets so far, and then he hears the voice of the Lord, the angel of the Lord. The voice of the Lord says this: "Take off your shoes, Moses. You're on holy ground." And he takes off his shoes, and he goes, and God reveals himself to Moses and tells Moses that I have heard the people cry for 400 years over there. Since the time of Joseph up to now, I've heard their cries and their pleas to help. You are going to be the deliverer. And in that meeting that he had with God, transformed Moses' life forever. It changed him for the next 40 years. And see, that's what he's saying here. As he's departing and he's leaving and he's going out to die, and Joshua and Caleb is going to take over. He tells them to remember the burning bush. Remember the bush. I have never to this day forgotten that place. I have never forgotten about that place that changed my life and changed my destiny. We used to sing a song, I Can Tell You the Time, page 34 in our hymn books. I could take you to the place where the Lord saved me by his wonderful grace. Now, everybody, all of you that has been born again of the Spirit of God, you have that precious place that God saved you, and it's fulfilled you. It's placed in there that it's been seared into you, and you'll never forget it. You can go back to that place in your mind. It might not exist anymore. The place where my uncle got saved, they tore down that building and everything, but he could probably still go to that landmark and place, and he'd probably show you where that is. The place that I got saved at is no longer existing, but my son and I drove by there a couple of months ago, and I wanted to go over there, and I seen where that place is now storage sheds and all that, but I could still remember that place and how God changed my life then, about 30 some years ago. And I could take you to the place now at the old Chesterton High School where God called me to preach. I could still walk in there, and I could take you to just about the spot where God changed my life right there, and he called me to preach. You'll never forget that. And that's what Moses is telling him right now. No matter what I went through in these 40 years with you, remember the bush. Secondly, you can be persuaded by the promise is going to be fulfilled by a little intervention miracles and mercies of God. That has to do with the same manner of the answer itself. David had a promise and is being chased by Saul. And as we said before, he's been chased. Saul's out to kill him because he's a threat to his kingdom and his power. And Saul wants to make sure that he remains the king. And he's doing everything that he possibly can to make sure of that. But he forgot one thing, that God was no longer on his side. He switched to David's side, and now he's fighting for David. And now, with everything that David had went through with, like we talked to you before, and on that mountain, here he is. He's surrounded by Saul, and he cannot. There's no way out. Come the next morning, they're all going to die. They know it. And one of the men, the spies, take David, and he said, "You'll never believe what we just found. Come over here, David." And he sees Saul laying there on the other side of the mountain, asleep. they had approached him and his army approached one side of the mountain, and they're on the other side of the mountain, and the two never see each other till this point in time. And he's laying there, Saul is laying there asleep, and God's showing him just how weak the enemy is to God. That anytime God can make the promise to David come alive, and he knows that that's not God's will right now for him to do that, and he knows then God will do it on his time. So what he does is he takes a knife and he cuts the surrounding garment of Saul, and Saul sees that the next morning. He knows that any time he could have been killed, and David had been king right then and there. So he withdraws his troops and leaves. Did David ever become king? Yes, he did. Why? Because God saw to it. It was the will of God. It was put in a desire of this young boy about 16 or 18 years old at that time. Now, here's the clincher to this. This is the wrapping up of this. Here's how you know that it's going to happen. And I'm going to use this phrase: all hell breaks loose. Everything goes wrong. Nothing seems to be right. The darkest hour is before the dawn. Have you ever noticed that? The darkest hour is before the dawn. Before you ever going to see a rainbow, you have to go through the darkest storms of life to see that rainbow, to get to that rainbow. In Acts chapter 7, verse 17 and following. But when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. Now I want to stop right there. I want to show you something. I don't know if you've ever seen or known this or heard this story told or whatever, what had happened. When Joseph and his brothers, what had happened was they eventually left Canaan land. And all these other ites came in and took over the land for about 400 years. They had left and they had went to Egypt. And they dwelled in Egypt. And for 400 years the Hebrews were there. But the multitude, they were outnumbering the Egyptians. They had their own mindset that if they get enough people, they're going to overthrow Pharaoh and they're going to take over, and that will be the promised land instead of Canaan land, which wasn't God's in God's design or God's plan. He gave Abraham that land over there, the Canaan land over there for them. He didn't give them Egypt. He gave them that land, not this land, that land. So they're going to come over and take over this land instead. They're living there and they're going to take it over. So they got a multitude. All we got to do is wait until these young boys grow up. We're going to teach them how to fight and everything. We're going to take it. We're going to take this land over, and it's going to be the new Canaan land. Until another king arose, the Bible said, which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and the evil entreated our fathers, and they cast out their young children, and to the end must not live. In other words, what had happened was there was a king that arose 400 years. When all this was happening, when the multitude was coming, they knew this was going to happen. So what they had prescribed to happen was they're going to kill all the Egyptian boys from they're born till up till about 2 years old, and none of them were going to live, and they're going to decrease in numbers right then. So all hope then of them taking over was lost. And this is when the time Moses came. If you remember the story of Moses, this is what had happened. At that age, Moses was at that age, and they were going to kill them all. So Moses' mother took a basket, her and her sister, and Moses' sister, and floated it down the stream where Pharaoh's daughter was. And Pharaoh's daughter seen Moses, the baby Moses, fell in love with it, and adopted it. And the mother of Moses came and asked to be the baby's nursemaid. And that's how all that came to be. So remember, the darkest hours are before the dawn. Are you going through the darkest hours right now? I know I am. Well, what keeps me going? What God has been doing to me just recently? Well, what has He been doing? He, by His own merit, has done this. For the past month, I've been having dreams, visions of things coming to pass. And as they come to pass and be fulfilled. So that's what keeps me going, hearing the voice of the Lord, knowing that these things are going to change because He said so. Not I, He said so. He's going to resurrect what He's given to me, this promise. So that's what I'm hoping for and going. I hope that this message has been encouraged to you. This is a 2-part series, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to finish it off with the next 2 so we could see this more clearer than what we've ever seen before.